So this is the first in a series of tutorials on WPF, which is the framework for making modern UI in Windows. We've got an example screenshot here of a UI that we want to make. This is actually a real request from somebody, and this is how we want it to look. We're going to make this exact UI in WPF to give you an introduction into just generally making a WPF application, making buttons, labels, text boxes, drop downs, the most common items. So we're going to use this as sort of a template of what we want to do. So we'll start with that. We'll open up Visual Studio. We'll create a new project. And we want a WPF application with Visual C#. We'll just call this WPF Basics. It will create a WPF application which will give you a assembly info, an app.config just containing the framework version, an app.xaml, which if you right click and view code, you'll see it's got a code behind file, and if you double click you'll see this tiny bit of XAML, this XML class file, and here's the startup, which is saying main window. And then this is the main window. So by default, when you create a WPF application, this is the window that will open. So press F5 and you'll see it compile and then just generate a blank window. So this is a blank WPF application, and this is what we're going to modify here. Here's your window, and it's similar to HTML. So you start with an angle bracket, and then the type, and then your attributes, and then you close the angle bracket, and then everything inside of that until you reach the same name again, but with a / before the name, like here. Everything inside of those two areas is contained within the element. So everything inside the window is between here and here, which is currently a grid. You can only have a single top level element in the window, so it has to be a container type element. And what we do in WPF, or at least what I do, is I tend to type in here and just watch this window here, so I can visibly see what I'm creating. I don't use this toolbar, which you can do, and just go to these controls and drag and drop them, but I prefer to type in here. And I'll talk through how I think this through whenever I'm making an application. So I've just resized the window slightly. We'll just zoom out to 100%. We'll hide this from here. So let's take a look at the screenshot. So you've got some buttons along here, some properties down here, some checkboxes here. So the first thing I do when I look at anything is I want to break this UI up into, there's really two main containers that I use in WPF, and you've got a stack panel and a grid. And a stack panel is an element that if you put items inside of it like this, they'll just stack one after the other, and they'll size based on what size they need to be. So this label will only be the size it needs to be, and then the box below will be right below. And that's a way of stacking elements. So just like a stack, you can stack them vertically, you can stack them horizontally. If you need anything more than a straight stack, so like here we've got 2 rows, then you want a grid, and then a grid can have 2 columns, and then you can use a stack panel inside to stack each section. So whenever you need to break this down, you first start with the container to break it down. So you can see in general the whole thing flows down. So we need to start with a stack panel because we need to stack things one on top of the other. So we'll change this grid, the first element, to a stack panel. And then I'll show you what I mean. If I just put a button in here, let's give it, and I'll paste 3 of them. You can see they just stack one on top of the other, and they just take up the room they need and no more. So that's a stack panel. A grid, on the other hand, everything will appear, see the grid's taking up the full possible space to start with, and because by default the grid's a single column, single row, all 3 buttons have stacked on top of each other. So all 3 buttons are there, you can't see the other 2 behind. So let's just start with the stack panel, and let's create this form. So you can see now we've got a stack panel. We want to start stacking down. Now the first set of 3 buttons, you could use a stack panel here and stack horizontally, but let's show you what happens when you do that. So the stack panel, the main one, is this outer container, the whole thing that's going to contain everything. And then we now need an inner stack panel. We're not going to use the stack panel, but we're going to show you what happens when you do these 3 buttons. So we've got 3 buttons there. Let's put an inner stack panel. And then inside that inner stack panel, we'll stack these 3 buttons. And then inside this bit here, you can type orientation. And let's change it to horizontal. And you can see what's happened. The stack panel only takes up the amount of space it needs. So if this was just the letter I, the button would only take up just enough space. So the stack panels basically take up as much space as needed and no more. So you can see when we look at the screenshot, these are 3 evenly divided buttons. So what we want here instead is a grid with 3 equal spaced columns. So let's go ahead and change the stack panel here to a grid. Get rid of orientation. And you can see the grid has now got a single column, so all buttons are stacked on top. So inside the grid, do grid.column definitions. And then inside the column definitions, do column definition. So for the first column, the width, and we'll use this asterisk, this star. And this is like a universal value. So if we have 3 columns, which is as simple as pasting 3, if they're all star, because there's 3 stars in total, all of them become a third, exactly 1 star, if you see. So it's a measurement. It's not a specific size, it's a measurement of the overall width. So if there's 3 stars, then it's a third. If you put like 2 star, then this one will take up twice as much space as the ones with 1 star. So you can see that's twice the width of those 2. So that's exactly half, and then those 2 take up the remaining half between them. So we've got a grid, and we've defined the grid columns here. So there's 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and they're all equally spaced. We then want to put 3 buttons inside of them, which we've done here. So there's the grid, there's the end of the grid, so everything inside is within the grid. So you can see these 3 buttons are within it, and this is like a special element inside the grid that defines the column. So it's not really like a button or a text box, it's defining how the grid behaves. So we've got a grid, we've got 3 columns, they're equally spaced. We want to give them the name apply, reset, and refresh. So we'll do apply, reset, refresh. And now you see they're all in this first column. So to change the columns, you do grid.column on the actual element itself. It's 0 index, which means it starts at 0. So the first one will start at 0. Then we want to move that one over to 1 and that one over to 2. And you can see now we've got 3 buttons. But you can also see there's no spacing. So the first thing we want is we don't want them right against the edge of the screen. And that holds true for everything we're going to put inside of here. So firstly, to get a border around here, like a padded border, let's wrap the whole thing, so let's wrap the entire stack panel in a border. So we'll literally just wrap it around this border element. And then in the border, we'll set, you can do a margin or padding. Padding's technically the one we want. And we'll do 10. And you can see that's moved everything inside. So now you've got this border around. Now we need the spacing between the buttons. Again, there's a slight annoyance with grids is that there's currently no way to specify. I'd call this a cell in a grid. So if you've got multiple rows, more than one row, then you'd have like a table in Excel. Every single cell, you should be able to specify the padding around them. You can do it, but it involves a lot of work where you'd think you'd just be able to type in here things like cell.padding is what you'd expect. So for now, just for quickness and for simplicity, we'll simply select this button, which is the first one, and we'll just add a margin. And then there's 4, you can put 4 items in, which are like top, bottom, left, right. If you can't remember the order, just put 10 in the first one, and you'll see. So the first one's left. Get rid of that and move the 10 over. So it goes left, top, right, bottom is the order. So we want one on the right there. So we'll put 10 padding margin on the right hand side of the button, and then on the last button we'll do it on the left side, which was that one, and we'll get rid of the 10 on the right. Let's press F5 and take a look at that. So you can see we've got 3 evenly spaced buttons. Now this one will be ever so slightly larger because these two have got the margin on them, this hasn't, but for this purpose it's perfectly fine. So we've got those first 3 buttons. So already we've done this top part. So remember the space around it's been the border, which is here with the padding. Then the stack panel is what then is going to stack everything down. The first item inside the stack panel is the grid, which holds these 3 buttons. And you can see the indentation if you get confused as to where things are. And then you can also do comments inside of here. So like this bit here now, this grid here contains the buttons. So to do a comment, it's a angle bracket, exclamation, and then 2 dashes. And if you press space, it'll also add the finishing part, which is dash dash and then an angle bracket. And we'll just put buttons. And this gives us a quick view when you're scrolling through this code of where things are. So this part's the buttons. Now after the grid, so the thing below the buttons, we need to have this title. So we'll use a text block. You can use a label or a text block. A label's very limited, so there's not much you can do with a label, so I tend to just stick with a text block. And then value text, and it will be pulse properties. And then if you've got nothing inside of the text block, you can just do / and close the angle bracket, and that's like a shortcut instead of doing close bracket and then open one and close it again straight after. So instead of having to open and close, because there's nothing inside here, like the stack panel's got this inside, that's why you need a stack panel then a closing panel. The text block has got everything it needs right here. There's no need for this open and close business. You can delete that and just do a shorthand version, which is this / close. You can see we've got the pulse properties here. We want to just make that bold, so it's called font weight bold, and there's the bold. And again, we want a bit of a spacing between them. This has got spacing above and below, so we'll do a margin, and we want it 0.10. And you can see there's a shorthand here. If you only specify 2 properties, the first one is the left and right, the second one's the top and bottom. So that's a quicker way of doing, if you've got the same margin top and bottom, you can just do 0 and then 10. So that's now got a spacing above and below. We then want another label, so we'll use another text block that just isn't bold. So we'll just copy and paste this. That'll be called description. Get rid of the bold. And then we don't want this big gap. This is a bit too much of a gap. So let's just start by removing the margin altogether. And we'll put a comment here again. Description. Now below that we've got this actual text entry field where the user can type something, and that's a text box. So same as everything else, just type text box, and then let's just close that. And you can see we've got a text box. Now I'm going to run this, so I'm going to press F5 and I'll show you the, I wouldn't say issue, but something I always change. So you click in this text box and look how compact, there's no space in between it. So you put the letter M, it's really close to the top. So I think that just looks a bit too squished in. So we're going to add some padding to give that a bit of breathing room. So padding goes on the inside, margins go on the outside. So because we want the space on the inside of the text block, we'll do padding. And we'll give it like 5 padding, well, maybe a bit extreme, let's just give 2. Let's press F5. And you can see now we just got that little bit of extra space around the writing, so it's just not quite as squashed in. So that gives us that block. Then we've got status and revision next. Now, because we've got 2 side by side, again, remember if we use a stack panel, they'll only take up the amount of space they need, which means these would be squished over to the left. So we need to use a grid again here. And it's just a grid with 2 columns this time, 1 column, 2 column. And by the looks of it, this is about twice the width of this one. So we'll do a grid that's got a 2 star and a single star. So this is twice the size of that. And then inside of those columns, we'll just do a little stack panel that'll stack this and this, and then this and this. So you can see whenever you're looking at anything, you're always just looking at really making a choice between a grid and a stack panel. And every single thing between those two, you can make up the UI. It really is as simple as that. You define your layout and you just break it down into stack panels and grids. So we'll start here. We'll make a comment what it's going to be, which is status and revision. We need a grid. We need some columns again, so let's define the columns. The first one needs to be 2 star, and the second one 1 star. And then inside of there we want a text block and text box similar to that. In fact, no, sorry, we want it inside of a stack panel, don't we, first? So these two stack. This is going to be the status. Oop. That's the status. It's going to be in grid.column0, which you don't need to specify. By default it will be in column 0. I just like to explicitly state where it is in case you move things around. Copy and paste the whole lot. Call that revision. Move it to column 1. You can see it's jumped over there. Call it revision. And again, we need this slight padding, so we'll do a margin on this status one, and we'll do it on the stack panel. So margin 0, 0, 10, 0 to put it on the right hand side. And you can see there now we've got the space between. You can also see the slightly grey. This is to indicate that they are read-only, so the user can't type in them. So to make them read-only in these text blocks here, you can actually use isReadOnly and set it to true, or you can use isEnabled, and both will do the same thing. You won't be able to type in them. So we'll do isReadOnly true, and we'll do background, and we'll set it to hash. Let's try E. There we go, nice and light. So that's a shorthand for EE, which is red, green, and blue, and a hexadecimal value of between 0 and 255. So if you don't know what these values are for colors, just have a look at hexadecimal color values. It's fairly simple. 0, 0, 0. So this starts at black. FFF is white, and everything in between is colors. So if you did F for red and no green, no blue, you'd get red. If you did no red, then green, then no blue, you get green. No red, no green and blue, you get blue. You get the gist. FF for green and blue, and you get cyan. Red and green, and you get yellow. So you get the gist. EEE is equal numbers of all. It's just below white, so it gives you this nice grey. We'll copy and paste that into the one below. And then we'll press F5, and let's make sure these can't be typed in. So you can see we can click, but you can't type in them, which is what we want. And this one we can. So that's got us the status and revision. Next one is part number. So that just goes below. So this is, again, really just carrying on the stack panel. It's just going down. So remember the indentation level. There's your stack panel. Here's your grid containing the buttons. You can minimize using this minus here. So that collapses that grid. So you've got your buttons, then you've got your pulse properties, then you've got description, then you've got this grid again, which contains the status and revision. So after that, we just want pretty much copy and paste this description. It's exactly the same as this, just carrying on. And it wants to be part number. There's that. And it wants to be read-only again. So let's just copy and paste this read-only. There's that. Then we've got this title again, and then material, and then a drop down. So it's basically like this: title, description, and then it's going to be a drop down. So we'll just copy and paste this part here because it's very similar. So we want click here, takes us to the title. I'm going to copy the title and the description, paste it below. add a comment. It's going to be raw material. And you can see how easy this is to, really quickly make a UI, especially when you're used to it like I am, how quickly you can just whiz through and create something exactly the same. That's going to be material. And then we want to change this from a text box to, in this case, this is a drop down. So that'll be a combo box, I believe. And then we'll leave that one blank. There's nothing in this at the moment, so we'll just leave that as is, and we'll add stuff when we come to here where you can see they've got values. So now there's manufacturing info and work centers, which is again the same as raw materials and material. So we'll copy that bit. Manufacturing info. There's the info, and then work centers. And now what you've got here, you've got a load of check boxes, so these can be ticked. And again, you've got 2 columns of them. So this will be a grid with 2 columns, and this will be a stack panel again. So that's actually exactly the same as these, because this is a grid. So we can go ahead and copy this for quickness, which is this grid here. Copy the whole grid, paste, and this is going to be, we'll just call it check boxes. We've got the column widths we want to be equal, so we just remove that 2. So now we've got a grid with 2 columns. Just delete what's inside of it for now. In fact, no, we can actually leave part of that. Column 1, and it's column 0, but in terms of comment for reading, column 1 and 2. And now inside of there, instead of the text boxes, we want to put check boxes. So checkbox, content is weld, and there we go. See, we've got the first one in. We want a little space between this and that because we've got like a space here. So we'll go to the work centers here and add a margin. There we go. So they've got this weld. We want another 1, 2, 3, 4. And to assembly plasma laser. And purchase. And then same on this side. So just copy and paste the checkboxes. Got lathe, drill, fold. Roll and saw. And there's the checkboxes. Let's press F5 and just take a quick look at this now, see how it's coming along. So we've got the buttons, we've got the text boxes, we've got the locked ones, we've got a combo box with nothing in at the moment. Got some check boxes we can check. And you'll notice also when you change the size of the form, everything changes in respect to the universal value. So this is always a third, this is always 2 times the width of this, and this is always half. So everything scales nicely, it's not restricted to a fixed size. Now we just continue this. So again, it's like description and part number for length and mass. So we'll copy description, and it wants to be outside that grid. And we'll copy part number for the read-only style. And then we'll change it from length and mass. And then we want finish, and this is a drop down again, just the same as material, and then we'll put some values in. So we want to go to material, which is here. paste that. This is finish. And now we want something inside this combo box, so we'll get rid of the shorthand / and we'll actually expand into the combo box. And then in here, we'll just do combo box item, just so we can hard code, we can hand type a value. And we know one of them, which is painted. And we don't know any others without seeing the the real list, because this is just a screenshot. So let's just add one other, not painted. And then you can see when you click the combo box in here, oops, when you click in here, or rather when you click in here, it shows you the drop down, but when you're outside there's nothing selected. So by default we're going to force this to select the first item. So in the combo box here, just type selected index and make that 0, and you'll see that's now selected the first item in the list. So we press F5 and let's have a look. Selected the first item, and the drop down we've got 2 options. So now you've got an option where you can select one or the other. We've then got this purchase information. Again, it's a drop down, so we'll just copy and paste the previous one. There's the purchase information. We know the first one was rubber. So again, just for quickness, we'll just type not rubber until we get the list of what needs to go in there. That's as much as we know. And then really everything else here is exactly the same again. Supplier name is just the same as length, so just copy and paste. And you can see we're going off here now, so let's just scroll back up to the top, and then in the title here we'll also put a title into the window here, main window, call it WPF Basics, and this height, which is the default height when it opens, will change to 800, make it that a little bit longer. So now we've got supplier name, we want supplier code, then we've got additional info and note, so that's just like pick any. Let's pick this one again. So there you go, there's the entire form. So we press F5 and we open up the screenshot, and then we open up the form. You can see that we've mimicked the whole form in a relatively short time. We can like move the margin here between length and here to get that. We could add a little bit of spacing like these have got. You can mess with that nice and easily, just add margins as you need to. We won't bother doing that because it's not needed. So I know we've gone through that really quick, but that was to show you how quick you can build a UI when you get used to WPF. So we'll go over these items in a little more detail. So as we mentioned, when you're inside a window, you can only have one master item. So that item's got to contain, it's got to be like a container ideally, so that you can put more things in. So a board is a container control. It can have one other thing inside of it, but it's still a container. It's got another control inside. So the border we've used just to add, as the name sort of suggests, a border, we've added a padding of 10. We've brought everything inside. So if we remove that padding, you'd see everything else would be pushed right up against the edge of the screen. So the purpose of the padding, the border, is to add that padding around the whole thing. Inside of the border, and again you can base it on where the indent is, we then add a stack panel, which by default is vertical, so everything will stack down that goes inside of it. The first thing we place inside of it is a grid that's got 3 columns and contains the 3 buttons, which is inside the columns 0, 1 and 2. So that goes 0, 1, 2. And then below that, so again because we're in a stack panel, it will go below. You've got the text block, pulse properties. A text block is just text, not something the user can type, it's just text itself. We've told it what the text is, we've made the font bold, and we've given it a margin below and above. And then below that we've added another text block, which is just text the user can see but not type. And then below that we've added a text box which the user can actually type into. We've added some padding which goes inside, whereas margin, if we add a margin, you'll see goes on the outside. You can see that the margin's gone outside the control, the padding's inside the control. So if we add like a 20 padding, you'll see how big the text box itself will go. So you've got a stack panel which goes down or across if you change the orientation. You've got a grid which can contain rows and columns, and you can set the specific sizes. You've got text blocks, which is just text. You've got text boxes, which is what you can type in. You've got these combo boxes, which is, you know, combination. It's a list of items that you can select one of. You've got check boxes, which a user can be true or false. It can be ticked or not ticked. And that's really all we've got in this form. That's the whole list of controls, but it's enough to see, you know, the basic controls. The way it's done, like I say, is very similar to XML or HTML if you've ever done web design, where you have an open and close angle bracket, and then if you don't put a forward slash there, then everything is inside of that until you get to the final part where you then type the same name again but with a forward slash. And you can see that throughout, so you can see a stack panel here, no forward slash, so everything inside is inside the stack panel until we do forward slash stack panel. So, and you can see it all indents it for you as well. So you think of it as like a hierarchical tree as you're stepping in. So if stack panel's further forward than border, it's inside the border. The grid is further forward than the stack panel, so it's inside the grid. The text box is the same level as the grid, so they're both inside the stack panel. And you go inside this grid, the buttons are inside the grid. So you can see it's easy to follow. And Visual Studio helps you with when you're typing a lot. So it will point out when you mistype things, that, you know, something's wrong. It's, you know, not a valid name. Or if you put, if you just close it off, it'll automatically add a finishing. So if I just close this now with a right angle bracket, it automatically adds the closing part for me. Things like that. So you'll find it quite easy to type in. And there's all your controls. If you're interested in what other controls there are, you can use this toolbox here. You can take a glance at them. And the reason I don't use this is because, as you'll see, let's say I grab a label, or let's use something we've used. Let's grab a text block, and I drag and drop it into here. You can see now it's just gone somewhere random. It's down here. It's just added it, and it's set all properties by default, and it's given it a default name. It just tends to add things that you don't need, and if you haven't got a stack panel, if you've got a grid like here, then it can tend to do, I don't know if it'll do this for us now, but it sometimes positions, and it's going to keep jumping there. It will position things by setting margins, and it just makes it really messy. So I always type WPF directly in code, and just get familiar with then, you know, how you're creating these UIs. Instead of just dragging and dropping and trying to position things, just think it through, and you're always thinking either a stack panel or a grid. So if you're going down or across and you're not trying to fill a set size, like these buttons want to be all of the width but divided equally, if it's just stacking down to an unknown, you know, size, just stack down until you've got as much as you need, then it's a stack panel. If you want to fill an area, like the whole area, or split the area into sections of, you know, specific proportions, like 2 to 1, or, you know, 1 to 3 here, or what have you, or, you know, 1 to 1, then you want a grid. There's only 2 choices to make, really. There's the odd occasion you want something different, but 99% of the time you put your items inside a stack panel or a grid, and then within that you then add more stack panels or grids until you finally get to adding the actual controls. So look over this code, you know, just pause the video and flick through this this code here. I'll just scroll down, and you can see the greener comments, as we mentioned. They start with this part, they end with this part, and then the comments inside. And then all these properties, as we go through the tutorials, we'll speak more in depth about, you know, specific properties. You can change backgrounds, foregrounds. You can add a hover effects when you hover over text boxes, make them glow, and you can get really fancy. So this is a very plain looking UI, and as we get more into depth with WPF, you'll see how much control you have and how easy it is to make really nice looking UI. So that's a really quick overview of firstly creating this UI. Now in order to do anything with this, let's say when you type in this description and then press apply, we just want to display a message box, we want to read that value. So in order to do anything with any of these controls, you need to give them names, so that in the code, so if you right click on the window over here and view code, you can see this is the code to the main window that we've made. This is the code behind class. So in order to do anything, access the controls in here, they need a name. So we want a name for this apply button, which is here. You do x:name, and then you type in apply button. And now let's say when we click this button, so in order to do something when it's clicked, type in click, press enter, and then it'll give you an option to do new event handler. Press tab and it will create that for you. Let's give it the name apply button click, and then if you right click on this main window and go view code, you'll see it's added this function for us. This is now linked in with when we click this button. So when we click this apply button, because it's linked to this function, it will run this code. And you'll also notice if you want to access the button itself, you can do this dot, and now you can see we can access the button apply button. Well, we want to access this description text. So let's click this text, which is here, x:name. We'll call this description text. Go back to our code behind class, and we'll just do messagebox.show, which is a really quick and dirty way of showing something on the screen. You want some text input. So just to show you what that does first, let's just do hi. Press F5. And you'll see when we click this, you get a message box that says hi. So now let's get the text out of here. So really simple now. Instead of putting hi, do this dot description, and you can see there you go, description text is the text box that we've got, and you want the text of that text box. So that will literally just get the text of the text box, and then we'll do a string that says the description is, and then the value of the text box. Press F5, hello world, and then you click this apply button, and you get the description as hello world. So you can see we've started to interact with this form. So in order to access these items, you need to give them names. So I won't bore you and go through every single one and name them, but let's go through one of each type so you know. The reset, we'll give that a name. We'll do reset button, and when we click that button, we'll clear off, say, these checkboxes. We'll make them all back to not checked. So we'll give each of these checkboxes a name. We'll do well checkbox, copy and paste, and then we'll call this assembly. Should have got rid of that. Plasma laser purchase. If you're wondering how I'm doing that multiple select, hold the Alt key, and then you can select you can draw a square around, and then you can also say you wanted to add a word specifically to every line here. You can just drag a line straight down while holding the Alt, and you could type in hello and it'll do it on every line. You can also use that to delete. So if you want to delete all the check, hold Alt, click and drag, and just press delete. So it's like a nice way of selecting text that's in a specific line. fold, roll, and saw. So now when we click this reset button, so we want to add a click. We want to reset all of those checkboxes. So I'll do this .weld.checked. So the checked property of the checkbox equals assembly plasma laser purchase. Purchase. And then we got lathe, drill, fold, roll. So we're just setting them all in one big go. So this equals this equals this equals. So they're all going to equal the same thing. Roll, lathe, drill, fold, roll. Yep. So that's the last one. So every checked property equals false, and that should check. Oh, and of course that's the wrong thing. That's the event. I think it is checked. Yeah. So checked is an event that will fire when it gets checked. So if we want to do something when something's checked, we'll go through that in a moment. So when we click the reset button, we want to set the checkbox to false for every one. So just press F5 and check that out. Select a few, click reset. You can see it's got rid of the checks for us. So now what we're going to do is, what happens if you want to know when these are checked? Then when you check any of these, we're going to add that text to, say, this length box. So we're going to set the text of this based, every time you click this, it'll add the word to this box. So let's go to here, let's click, say, the weld. And now what we're going to do is add the same event to every checkbox. We want the same action to happen every time you click. So we don't need a, an event for this and this and this and this, and then write the code every single time. You need a single function. So in the checkbox, do checked, which is similar to click. You can see this lightning. It means an event when something happens. Press enter and then tab like before. And it's made this weld checkbox checked. Let's just delete the word weld. Let's go to the code behind and also delete the word weld. So now we've got this universal function checkbox checked. We're going to copy and paste this to every one. So again, if hold Alt, drag down and paste, you can paste it to all of them. So now when you click any checkbox, this function is going to run. We want to set this length text box, so we'll name this length text. And then in this checkbox checked function, we want to set this .length text.text. And then instead of just saying equals, we want to add to it. So it's just a string like any other string. Do plus equals to add to what's currently in there. And now we need to get the name, or in this case the content. We want this right in here. So whenever you click checked, you'll notice the function passes in this object sender. This object is the checkbox itself. So instead of it being an object, we cast it by doing a checkbox in parentheses and then the word sender after. Then we wrap the whole thing in parentheses. So that's converted it into a checkbox. And then the checkbox dot content, which again can be anything because it could be something else. We know it's a string. So it's the content. And then to cast the content to string, it looks like it's automatically doing it for us anyway, so we don't need to. But if we had to, you'd just cast it this side. So when you're casting things, you've got this parentheses on the left with the value that you cast to inside. So you can see here the sender has been cast to a checkbox, and then we've wrapped it all inside this so that we can then access the checkbox content. And then we could cast the content itself here into a string, but it looks like it's not needed, so we'll just delete that string. So now when we click a checkbox, it should get the current checkbox that we checked, get the contents and add it to the length text. So let's try that. There you go, you see weld, assembly, fold, laser, purchase. That's just, again, just an example of showing you what things are. You can notice as well that when you're unchecking, it's not doing anything. The checked is when you check only. You've then also got, I'm guessing, unchecked, yep. And then you'll have maybe changed. There'll be one for, I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head, but there's also an event for when a checkbox just changes. You know, it can be checked or unchecked. I'm pretty sure there is one anyway. Let's have a quick look. Whoops. Well, anyway, I'm pretty sure there is one. You can Google it if not. Just add the same event to checked and unchecked. There's nothing stopping you doing unchecked is checkbox checked, and it runs the same function on both if you wanted to do it that way. But I think there is a universal event that does both. Now you got this drop down here. So again, let's say when we change this drop down and select a new item, we'll add it to the note down here. So let's name this note. Note text, and then in this combo box, this drop down, the selection changed. That's the one we want. Let's delete that selected. I'm not sure what that is. So selection changed. I'm sure I typed that in the first place. So now when the selection changes, we want to add the value to the note text. So again, we know the sender is a combo box, and we want to set the note text, and this time we'll set it to the value. So we want to cast the sender to a combo box, and we want to do selected value, I believe is what we'll get, and again that'll convert to a string automatically, will it? Nope. Okay, let's cast it to a string. Let's see if that works. So selection's changed, sender is this. I'm guessing the value is either not the right type or unable to cast object of type combo box item to string. Okay, so by default this selected value is a combo box item, not a string directly. So instead of it being a string, we'll do combo box item, and then from that item, wrap that all in parentheses again. We can then do content, which will convert to a string because the content is a string. And that lovely big long messy looking statement there is how you get the value. So if you wanted to make that look a bit nicer, you could first get the combo box, put it in a variable like that. You could then do the value as a combo box item, like that, and you can see it looks a bit cleaner. You can easily see what you're casting to. You can do the value.content as string. So that you can do that if you want to make it look a bit nicer. Let's press F5, and we've got a object reference not set to an instance. Okay, it looks like the note text is null at the moment, so this is firing before the thing's been created. So instead of doing checking if this is null, you can do just this conditional question mark here. So then if it is null, oh no you can't, okay, let's just check if it's null at the top. So if this dot note text equals null, return because we can't set it yet. So this is obviously firing before the note text has even been created. So now, there we go, it spins up. We check this and change, and you can see it's now selecting the value. You'll notice on startup, it doesn't have a value, and that's because the selection change was fired as we saw before this was created. So it's probably firing in order of creation. So if you want to set it to the value when the form initially opens, so you want to find the value, you can just call this function, or you can put this inside of a function. Hang on, sender as a combo box. Yeah, this combo box. Okay. So there's a few ways. For quickness, again, we'll call this function, and because we're using the sender here, we're going to pass in the finish dropdown into the function itself. So you can do it. You can do it here in the constructor, but you probably want to do it in. Oh, this will be fun. Try and remember this on. I think it's loaded or something. Ooh, if I could type. Let's just drop into here, see if there's an option, an event. Loaded, there we go. So in the window itself we add an event when it's loaded, so that's when everything's been fully loaded. This event will then fire, and then we'll just call this initial value to set the value. So we could just rewrite this code, but because we've got the function already, we'll just call the function finish dropdown selection changed, and it needs the sender, which in this case we know is meant to be the finish dropdown, and we're not using the argument, so we'll just pass null. So that will just call this function and pass the sender as the finish dropdown, so that this code can find, you know, the combo box. So if we press F5 now, when the window loads, it will run this function, and you can see it's filled it in then when you initially opened, so you've got the default value, and then this function fires after. So now we're using an apply button to read the description, a reset button to uncheck these. You can type in anyway. We know how to get the value from the apply. We set the value in like here when you change the value around. We also do it here when you're checking. They are read only, so you know you can't type in them. And I think that's really everything in this form, in some basic usage, you know, so you can generally create controls and mess with them and do things when you click them, or do things when things get typed in them. So there's a thing. Let's do another one. When you type in supplier name, let's copy the exact same code into supplier code. Well, no, let's copy it into mass because that's read only. So we'll just mimic the code, mimic the text that we write. So let's go to supplier name. Let's give that a name so we can access it in code behind. Not that we need to, but we might as well. And then this time it's going to be text changed event. So when the text is changed, we want to set this mass. So that needs a name. Mass text. And go to the code behind, and now every time the supplier name text is changed, we want to do this dot mass text dot text plus equals, and then you'll see this text event args. I think, in fact, no, let's just set it to always be the exact same text. So equals this dot supplier name text dot text. And you could use, instead of doing this, we could actually use the sender, cast the sender to a text box and get the value from it. But because we're only using this function for this exact control, we'll just access the control itself here. So now we'll just set the mass text to equal the supplier name text every time the text changes. So now if we type in here, you can see it copies here as we're typing, which is quite cool. And I think that's really all we can do with these controls in terms of, you know, basic usage for the first video. I think it's at least a good introduction. In future videos, we'll go more into potentially styling these to make them look nicer. We might go into view models, although that gets fairly complicated, but really when you start doing code like this, you don't want to be putting your logic, your code in effectively the UI. This is the UI, the main window, and this is the code behind. This is just the code that really should be to do with creating the UI. And we're starting to do, you know, logic. We're starting to make our program inside here, and that's sort of bad practice. You don't want your code inside of the code behind class. So the way we would get rid of this is to make a view model, and it's quite a complicated thing. So again, that's something for a future video, but it's something we'll have to go over because it's something you want to do very early on. So we'll do view models probably. We'll do some styling. And we'll see where we go from there. So hopefully this was a a good introduction into WPF, and it's enough to then allow you to start playing with you know, all of these controls, and just pressing space and having a look at what options you've got on them, changing the values. Let's change this like horizontal, and it'll turn everything that way, and you know, just to have a play around yourself and see what changes, and that's a good way to get a feel for what happens. So you can go into here and do a background of red and change the color to red. You know, you just have a play and get a feel for the general UI, and then we'll carry on in the next videos.